Hey everybody. Today Grampy is going to read you Loud Mouse by Richard Wilbur. Once there was a mother mouse who had four little baby mice. The four little mice and their mother lived in the house of Mr. and Mrs. Arthur L. Dowd. Mr. and Mrs. Dowd lived in the rooms of the house, and the little mice and their mother lived inside the walls. One day, the mother mouse thought the time had come for a talk with her children. Children, she said, you are big little mice now, and I think you are ready to be on your own and go where you like and find your own food. But first, let me tell you some things to remember. Mr. Dowd does not know that we live in this house, and if he found out, he would not like it. You must always take care not to be seen. When you're hungry and want to visit the kitchen, wait until night when Mr. Dowd is asleep. And don't leave any tracks on the kitchen floor. And above all, never make any noise. Do you hear me? I hear you, Mamma, said the first little mouse. I hear you, Mamma, said the second little mouse. I hear you, Mamma, said the third little mouse. I hear you, Mamma, said the fourth mouse, very loudly. Be quiet, child, said the mother mouse. Yes, be quiet, you loud mouse, said the other little mice. And Loud Mouse was his name from that time on. Loud Mouse, said his mother, just you listen to me. You must not talk in that loud way, because if you do, Mr. Dowd will hear you. And if he hears you, he will know that there are mice in his house, and he will go and buy a mouse trap or a cat. A mouse trap, said Loud Mouse very loudly. What's that? Be quiet, child, said his mother. Now listen to me, and I'll teach you a little song about traps so that you will always remember what they are. The little mice sat still and listened while their mother very quietly sang them this song. If you see a thing that's a piece of wood and a kind of spring and a hook and a bar and a bite of cheese that looks very good, don't touch it, please. Stay where you are. Take care or snap, you'll be caught in a trap. Now, do you know what a trap is like? Said the mother mouse. Yes, Mamma, said the three quiet little mice. Yes, Mamma, said Loud Mouse very loudly. But what is a cat? Be quiet, child, said his mother. Now listen again, and I'll teach you a little song about cats so that you will never forget what a cat is like. The little mice sat still and listened while the mother mouse very quietly sang them a song. If you see a thing with eyes that glow, which looks as though it's about to spring, if it's furry and has four paws and a tail and claws and a face that's fat, leave in a hurry. That is a cat. Now do you know what a cat is like? Asked the mother mouse. Yes, Mamma, said the three little quiet mice. Yes, Mamma, said Loud Mouse very loudly. Be quiet, everyone told him. But Loud Mouse could not learn to talk in a quiet way. He wanted to be nice and do what his mother told him, but every time he said anything, he made a great big noise. One night, Mr. and Mrs. Dowd were sitting in the living room, and Mr. Dowd said, Jane, I think there must be a lion in that wall. A lion, dear, said Mrs. Dowd. Oh, you're just being funny. There isn't room for a lion inside that wall. Well, said Mr. Dowd, something inside that wall just made a very loud noise. Didn't you hear it? Come to think of it, said Mrs. Dowd, I have been hearing noises in this house for about a week, but I told myself I must be dreaming. Just then Loud Mouse said something inside the wall. He talked so loudly that it almost made the house fall down. Really, said Mrs. Dowd, we must do something about this. I'm pretty sure it's just a mouse, said Mr. Dowd, but I must say it's a very loud mouse. Please remember to buy a mouse trap tomorrow. I guess I shall have to, said Mr. Dowd. I really like mice, but I don't see how we can put up with so much noise. The next night, when Mr. and Mrs. Dowd had gone to bed, Loud Mouse was hungry. I think I'll go to the kitchen, he said to himself, and eat some of that fine cheese which Mrs. Dowd has just bought. He stuck his head out of a hole in the living room wall and looked around to be sure that everybody was gone. On the floor, not far away from the hole, sat a trap with a nice piece of cheese in it. Loudmouth didn't know what it was. My, he said to himself, what a pretty piece of cheese. Loudmouth came out of the hole in the wall and walked over to the trap and started to take a bite of the cheese. But then something made him stop and think. He looked hard at the trap and remembered his mother's song. He sang the song to himself. If you see a thing that's a piece of wood and a kind of spring and a hook and a bar and a bite of cheese that looks very good, don't touch it. Please stay where you are. Take care or snap, you'll be caught in a trap. Oh, said Loudmouth as loudly as always and jumped back from the trap. It's a trap, a bad trap. Mr. Dowd heard the noise, got out of bed, and ran down to the first floor. He was just in time to see Loudmouth hop back into his hole, calling loudly to his family. Watch out! Watch out! Called Loudmouth. There's a bad trap in the living room. Mr. Dowd went back to bed and said to Mrs. Dowd, Jane, that loud animal is a mouse, all right, but I don't think we can catch him with that trap. He knows what it is, and he has just gone to tell his whole family about it. Well, said Mrs. Dowd, there's only one thing to do. You must go to the pet shop and buy a cat. I guess I'll have to, said Mr. Dowd, because we really can't put up with all of this noise. The next night, when Mr. and Mrs. Dowd had gone to bed, Loudmouth was hungry again. He said to himself, I think I could do with a bite of that fine cheese in the kitchen. So he stuck his head out of the hole in the living room wall and looked around. He was happy to see that the trap was gone, but in its place there was something else, something bigger. It was a cat. Loudmouth didn't know that the cat was a cat, and he wanted to find out what kind of a thing it was. So he came out of the hole in the wall and walked right up to where the cat was sitting. He was about to say hello, but then something made him stop and think. He didn't like the look of the cat's face, and the words of his mother's song started to come back to him. He sang to himself, if you see a thing with eyes that glow, which looks as though it's about to spring, and if it's furry and has 4 paws and a tail and claws and a face that's fat, leave in a hurry. That is a cat. Help, said Loudmouth very loudly. It's a cat, a very bad cat. That cat was so surprised to hear the mouse make so much noise that it jumped into the air, fell on its back, and then ran away as fast as it could go. Mr. Dowd got out of bed and came downstairs just in time to see Loudmouth hop back into his hole, calling loudly to his family. Watch out, everybody, called Loudmouth. There's a bad cat in the living room. The cat was hiding under the chair, holding its front paws over its ears. Mrs. Dowd went back to bed and said to Mr. Dowd, Jane, that cat is not going to be much of a help to us. It's so surprised to hear such a big noise coming from a mouse that now it's afraid of mice. Tomorrow morning, I shall take the cat back to the pet shop. But what are we going to do? Asked Mrs. Dowd. We can't put up with all this noise. I, for one, am going to sleep. The next night, when Mr. and Mrs. Dowd had gone to bed, Loudmouth was very hungry. After all, he had not gotten anything to eat for 3 days. I really must have some of that fine cheese in the kitchen, he said to himself. So he stuck his head out of the hole in the living room wall and looked all around. He was glad to see that there was no trap waiting for him and no cat. But just at that minute, a funny thing happened. The living room window was quietly opened from the outside, and a man climbed into the room. He was a bad-looking man with a cap on his head and a bag on his back. He walked across the floor without making any noise at all. He was as quiet as a mouse, as quiet as most mice, anyways. At first, Loudmouth could not guess what the man was up to because he had never seen a robber before. The robber turned on a light in the living room and started taking things. He took a gold box from an end table and put it in his bag. And then he took the candlesticks from above the fireplace put them in his bag too. Loudmouth watched what the man was doing and said to himself, there's something not right about this. I really don't think he should be taking those things. After a while, the robber carried his bag into the next room, and Loudmouth went along, keeping an eye on him. The man looked into all the kinds of places and took all kinds of things, cups and glasses and a pretty bowl from on top of the dinner table. I still don't see how it's right for him to take all these things, said Loudmouth to himself. After all, he doesn't live here. At last, the robber had put so much into his bag that there wasn't room for anything more. He set the bag down, walked into the kitchen, turned on the light, and started hunting for something to eat. Loudmouth hopped after him and hid under a kitchen chair, where it was so dark that he could not be seen. When Loudmouth looked out from under the chair, what do you think he saw? The man had cut a piece of the fine cheese and was about to eat it. That was too much for Loudmouth. He couldn't stand it. He knew that the man had no right to take that cheese. Robber, said Loudmouth, more loudly than he had ever said anything. What makes you think that you can eat our cheese? The robber gave a start, and his cap fell onto the floor. He turned around to see who was there, and there was nothing to be seen. This made him even more afraid, and so he ran as fast as he could to the living room and jumped right out the window head first. Loudmouth could hear Mr. and Mrs. Dodd talking to each other and getting out of bed. He picked up the piece of cheese, which the robber had let fall, and ran back to his hole in the living room wall. When Mr. and Mrs. Dowd got down to the first floor, Mr. Dowd looked at the open window. Then he looked into the next room and saw the bag on the floor. And then he remembered Loudmouth's cry of, "Robber!" He turned to Mrs. Dowd and said, "Jane, I think that we're going to be friends with that Loudmouth. After all, he has just stopped a robber from taking all of our best things." Mrs. Dowd looked into the bag and said, "Oh, my lovely bowl, and my cut glass candlesticks, and my gold box. To think that they'd all be gone if it hadn't been for that mouse." "It looks to me," said Mr. Dowd, "as if a watch mouse is just as good as a watch dog. From now on, I'm going to be very kind to that mouse and make him feel right at home." And that is just what he did. From that time on, Mr. and Mrs. Dowd have left some nice cheese in front of the mouse hole every day. Sometimes it is fine old cheese which has come by boat from other lands. Loudmouth and his whole family eat very well and are right at home. And you may be sure that Loudmouth keeps an eye out for robbers every night. If you see a thing which is small in size, with a tail that's long and two bright eyes, which likes a bite of cheese at night and makes more noise than a pair of boys, remember to sing this remembering song and be very nice to the best of mice. You are looking at Loudmouth, who lives in the Dowd house. The end.